In a small village in southern India, mornings begin before sunrise. Farmers walk into their fields, feeling the soil, watching the sky, and waiting like the generations did before them. But today, farming is no longer just about the monsoon. Water flows through canals, crops grow faster, and new technologies have really shaped the land. And all of it is a part of something bigger called development. This is a story about development in rural India and about how ideas of progress reshaped agriculture, water, and daily life, and about how those changes didn't affect everyone equally, and much of it was shaped by forces far beyond the village, especially from the United States. My dad grew up in a village in India during a time when agriculture was rapidly changing. I asked him what he remembers from that period.
When I was young, the farming was entirely dependent almost on natural rainfall. But over the time, better irrigation, fertilizers started changing how people farmed.
After gaining independence in 1947, India faced an urgent challenge, feeding a growing population. Food shortages were common and agricultural production was highly uncertain, and the pressure to modernize was intense. During this time, the United States became deeply involved through food aid, agricultural research, and development programs. The Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation, working alongside USAID, were central to bringing new seed varieties and agricultural techniques to India. Historians of the Green Revolution document this as a deliberate effort to use food security as a tool of Cold War geopolitics. India, as a newly independent democracy, was seen as a critical stronghold against communism in Southeast Asia. And between 1950 and 1971 alone, India received $10 billion in concessional American food aid.
At the time, people did not realize where the problem is originating. It was seen as a progress or based on the government programs, okay?
That invisibility is significant. The U.S. influence didn't always announce itself. It arrived quietly, embedded in the seeds and the infrastructure and the expertise that came along with it. But Anandi, who works with Sevalya, an NGO that has spent decades supporting farming communities in rural Tamil Nadu, says that invisibility was itself a form of power.
Yeah, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, nobody in the village voted for them. But their decisions shaped everything. What we knew, what we grew, how we grew it, and what our soil looks like today because of it.
Out of this moment came one of the most significant transformations in agriculture, called the Green Revolution. Funded and designed largely through American foundations and international agencies, the Green Revolution introduced high-yield seeds developed in Mexico and the United States, chemical fertilizers, and expanded irrigation systems. At first, it seemed like a great success. Crop production increased dramatically, and India moved closer to food self-sufficiency. However, historians of agrarian change argue that beneath all of that success, the impacts were deeply uneven. Farmers who could afford the new technologies benefited the most, and larger landowners expanded production, but smaller farmers couldn't keep up. Environmental scholars studying Punjab's agricultural transformation as well have documented how even though there was an initial period of success, farmers became trapped in cycles of debt, paying for expensive imported seeds, fertilizers, and deepening irrigation wells, while soil quality declined and water tables dropped. In some areas, farmers once drilled 10 feet to find water, and today they must drill 200 feet, and that depth increases every single year. And since 2000, at least 7,000 farmer suicides have been recorded in Punjab alone, with some observers arguing that the real number may be 3 times higher than what's reported.
In those days, people with the resources and had the means able to get better seeds, disease-resistant seeds, and also other inputs, and they were able to get better yield. People never questioned; they kind of accepted it, but it was all based on what people do and what kind of resources and knowledge information they had. So it's like a gambling of people with knowledge, they do good, and people without that, and they were struggling.
The Green Revolution didn't just change how food was grown. It changed who had access to the opportunity and who didn't. And at the same time, large-scale infrastructure projects like dams and irrigation canals were transforming rural landscapes, often backed by global development models and promoted by the World Bank and American-aligned international agencies. These projects were designed to control water, expand agriculture, and generate electricity. From a national perspective, they represented progress for India, but for many communities, they came at a cost. Villages were displaced, land was submerged, ecosystems were disrupted, and even when irrigation systems were built, the access to water was not equal.
Some areas had good irrigation and others did not. It really depended on what you can afford and what resources you had.
The dam comes and they say it is for everyone. But the benefits flow upwards to the cities, to the industries, and the landowners. The people who lose the most are the ones that had the least to begin with.
Development promised control over nature, but in reality, it just redistributed the control and often very unevenly. And to understand these differences, it's important to look at the social structure. In rural India, access to land, water, and resources are shaped mainly by caste, class, and gender. Studies in journals like Ambio also confirm this pattern. Researchers studying farming communities across India found that intersecting identities from caste and wealth to gender shape who can access these resources and who can actually adapt to the changes. Lower caste and poor women consistently face the greatest barriers with the least access to land, information, and decision-making power. Meanwhile, women shouldered a majority of the agricultural labor while remaining largely excluded from the ownership and the resource decisions that shape their own livelihoods. Environmental justice scholars even note that these inequalities weren't accidental, they were built into the design of these development programs that directed all of these resources, trainings, and decision-making authority towards men and higher caste households. Anandi works directly with these women, and she is pointed about what development has and hasn't done for them.
Every development program that comes goes to the men. Women are just invisible in this planning and only seen in the labor side of it. That is not development. That is just a same version of the same old hierarchy.
This meant that even when development increased productivity, it didn't necessarily improve equity. Environmental change doesn't happen in isolation. It interacts with existing inequalities, and in India's case, and in a lot of other cases, it often reinforces them too. Today, a new wave of development is reshaping rural India, and it's in the name of climate. Solar and wind projects, often funded by international climate finance and multinational corporations with ties to American and European capital, are being introduced as solutions to the environmental crises that earlier development helped create, actually. They promise a more sustainable future, but environmental justice scholars also argue the same questions. Who are actually benefiting? Who has access? And who is left out? In some cases, renewable energy projects require large amounts of land, which raises familiar concerns about displacement. And access to clean energy is not evenly distributed, and the communities that are most affected by climate change are often the ones that have the fewest resources to adapt. Anandi herself mentioned that she sees a trouble pattern repeating itself.
Now they come with solar panels and call it a green transition. But when a solar plant takes over the agricultural land, whose land does that become? The real climate justice means that the communities must make the decisions, they should lead the decisions, not just be on the receiving end of them.
But rural communities are not passive. Across India, people respond to these changes through protest, adaptation, and resilience.
Also, some cases and people did protest, especially when their land was taken over. But it's not enough to make any significant change, and not majority of the people didn't have the power to push back.
One of the most significant examples is the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the Save the Narmada movement, which organized tens of thousands of displaced villagers against large dam construction, bringing global attention to the human costs of development infrastructure. Some communities organized against land acquisition, others developed strategies to manage water and agriculture, and all of these farmers experiment with alternative practices, while activists push for more equitable policies. Anandi described to me what the resistance looked like on the ground and what actually makes it possible.
See, resistance doesn't always look like a protest. It's sometimes women refusing to give up their seed bank. Sometimes it's a farmers' collective challenging the dam in the court. When communities are organized, they push back, and the Narmada movement showed that the development can be contested and that ordinary people have some type of standing in this realm.
Development is often told as a simple story of progress, boiling it down to more food or more infrastructure or more technology. But in rural India, the reality is so much more complex than that. Development has transformed landscapes and livelihoods, but so unequally that it has created opportunity, but it has more so created inequality from that. So the question isn't whether development works, it's more so who it's actually working for. And this raises a bigger question, one that reaches beyond India's borders. When countries like the United States shape agricultural systems, fund infrastructure, and drive climate finance in the global sphere, they're making decisions about land, water, and livelihoods for people who have no vote or say in any of these choices. Environmental justice doesn't just stop at national borders, and understanding that global reach in terms of who holds power and who's bearing the costs is essential to imagining something better and imagining a version of development that is just and fair and effective as well. Thank you for listening.